Ross, would you like to say a little
Ross,
bit about who
Ross,
you
you're
are?
a Texan. Aren't you a native Texan?
I am. I'm from Texas originally. I grew up in Houston and went to college in San Antonio. So, like many Texans, I'm way too proud to be from Texas, even though I'm not sure the state deserves the pride that I bestow on it. Also, if you hear things going on in the background, we just got a brand new puppy.
Oh, yay.
Ooh.
So if I
A second puppy?
Yeah, so if I have to, if I like, if you catch me glancing over my shoulder, it's because she's 3 months old and can't be trusted.
Can we see
Um,
her? Is it just horrible for us to see her? Would that be
What's her
too
name?
her name is Pierogi.
Oh,
like
She's really chill right now, and she's never chill, and so I'm gonna keep her where she is,
yeah.
yes.
because she's either chill and laying down, or she's like squealing.
Wait,
Um,
pierogi like the Spanish, I mean not Spanish, like the
Yeah.
Polish.
The Polish dumpling. Yeah.
Yeah.
We have one dog named Nacho. And so in keeping with the food theme, we named our next dog, which is a Burmese mountain dog.
Oh, wow.
So
Nice.
she'll get quite big.
And are you still in DC?
We are for the time being, yes.
Okay. So you're going to head out somewhere else at some point.
I think so. Probably, honestly, I think we'll probably end up in LA
Mm,
for a little while, and we'll see if we like it. And if we do, then great. If not, we won't. We recently decided we don't really want to have kids, and so we're just gonna bop around the country for a while.
Oh,
right.
smart.
Um, yeah, there's like no reason to be in one spot. Both of our work allows us to be remote.
So
And
how would you describe your work, Ross?
I would say that I'm in a bit of a transition phase in life right now, in a lot of different ways. So I founded an organization called Run for Something about 8 years ago. We recruit and support young people to run for state and local office. Um, I am leaving at the end of the year, and will be transitioning into probably like starting a new thing because I only sort of have no one way to operate in the world.
What is
Uh,
that way? Wait, quickly describe that way. What is that way?
I'm an all or nothing kind of person.
Yeah.
I'm either 110% in or I'm 0% in.
Right.
Um, I would say I've worked on that over the years and have improved. But that's my natural inclination. And I really, really I thought what I wanted when I left Run for Something was to just like consult for a couple of years and make a lot of money. Um, and not work that hard, to be totally honest.
Wait a
And
minute, you thought you would make a lot of money at starting an organization trying to get people to run for something?
no, no, no. That's after I was done, what I wanted to do was what I
Got it.
felt in my head, what I wanted to do in my head was just like make a bunch of money being a consultant, get on calls, tell people my thoughts and write some memos. And like that's definitely an option. I could do it. But I couldn't really get my heart there. So that's not likely what I'm gonna do next. But like, yeah,
Yeah, what are you gonna do next? I mean, do you want to go there? Do you want to talk about what you see or what skills you want to
Yeah,
apply?
oftentimes we ask people what are they curious about right now,
Yeah.
or what are they passionate about right now?
Yeah.
I'm actually really interested in I'm really interested in organizing and working with men. I think that we have a major problem in the United States. I mean, it's not just actually the US, it's a lot of Western and non-Western countries are having some of the same problems. Men are getting radicalized at like a much higher rate. Um, there's a really interesting book that was written by Richard Reeves who talks a little bit about how like basically none of our social like safety net programs actually have like net positive outcomes for men. Almost all of the statistically significant net positive outcomes like actually end up accruing to women, but because we don't really measure impact around gender often in like our like program evaluation for government programs, we like miss that. But like if you looked, one of the better examples I think he used was the Kalamazoo promise where they, and if you're in Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I can't remember exactly how it works, but basically if you go to high school there, they'll pay for you to go to an in-state college for free. Um, Basically all of the benefit from that was like seen with women. Um, there was basically no statistically significant impact on men attending college. Um, and that was like being told that they could go to college for free. So, that indicates to me that there's like deep cultural and social and probably some structural problems in there, but I think a lot of cultural and social issues that exist. And I don't like our society can't function when half the population is struggling and in some way, shape, or form like buys into a like really rigid um like basically really rigid ideologies on how they exist in the world. That just
I
it's not tenable.
I agree. Can I pipe in here and say it's not just half the population that's struggling, it's all the population is struggling for different reasons. Like even the one percenters are struggling for different reasons. Like there's a struggle there for everybody because the entire structure, the sort of expectations about the way we're supposed to be doesn't work. It doesn't work for women or people who are non-gendered or of any gender, actually, as well as not working for men, that there is this way that men are supposed to be that we still haven't broken out of. The women's movement has done a really good job, sort of helping women maybe be a different way, and that's been an uphill battle, and that's still going on. But we're decades behind when it comes to allowing men to have a different way of being. And so I just wanted to point out, it's not half the country that's struggling; it's everybody.
Yeah, and I think like like there's a loneliness epidemic that like has that like actually largely impacts both men and women. I think like the problems that men face are are very culturally specific. Um, and I think nobody there's no nobody there's no liberation for anyone that doesn't go through men at this point. And I would actually say that isn't why the work I to me that's not why I'm motivated to do the work, but like it is also a truth. I think like we should do the work for the sake of doing the work. And also like a lot of the progress we want to see in society like is not going to happen, cannot happen until like we sort of like give folks the space to break out of like very rigid gender roles and structures. And I think like that's yeah, I think you're right. Like that has been underway with women for decades at this point, and there have been fits and starts like around sort of like men's work, and there was some really good work in the 60s and 70s, and then a lot of that got co-opted in sort of like the 80s and 90s until like
Talking
less.
about like the New Warrior Project and these, yeah.
Yeah, and then they like sort of turned into like Andrew Tate and Jordan Peterson and
Mm.
uh who
Well,
were
so
like
I don't know who those people are. I've heard of those people, but what can you describe those people instead of sort of in an ad hominem way, but can you describe them in a sort of a meta, who are
yeah,
those people?
they fit into like sort of like the term of art now that folks are using is the manosphere. So like basically the parts of the internet, and honestly it's offline too at this point, um that sort of like indoctrinate men into I don't think this is I hesitate to describe it this way because it's not totally political, but it is political in some ways. Like, so like into basically what is like sort of like far right ideology. um, and sort of like scapegoating. And I mean far right, not necessarily in like US political context, but like sort of in broader political context. Like a lot of scapegoating of like women, scapegoating of immigrant, like the ideologies are very like they use rigid ideas around masculinity and then like are able to sort of create community and belonging by scapegoating like all
So
sorts of
this is
groups.
like an alternative to doing the work. So when you talk about doing the work, I think what you're talking about, and I want you to clarify this, but I think what you're talking about is doing the internal work that it takes to allow yourself and other men to show up differently in the world, as opposed to, it sounds like the way I would, forgetting about left, right, because that's even political and it doesn't have to be that way. Just as opposed to not doing that and instead saying it's all everyone else's fault. I don't have to do any internal work. Is that the distinction?
I think that's part of it. I think like when I say the work, that's part of it. I also I think there's organizing work that has to happen too. And I also am sort of referencing that as well. I think we're not we're not going to get to a place where men are like seeking out healing and resilience by telling them they need to seek out healing and resilience.
That's for sure true.
Yeah, it doesn't work for anyone. You can't just
No,
like just go to people and be like, be better, even though like maybe that is like what we want to say.
it
Uh,
doesn't work and it's not motivating.
no, it's not. And it just alienates and like pushes people further and further away.
Yeah.
And the reason I sort of talked about it in sort of like a far right context is because the folks who are doing that are also aligned with sort of like far right ideology politically in addition to, but it's really difficult to describe the problem. I have not come up with a good way to describe the problem outside of sort of like a ideological continuum. I'm sure there is another way. I just haven't.
Well,
Well,
Ross and I have known each other more or less for, well, more than 10 years. And I have for about 10 years been talking about what I describe as the loss of meaning. So the loss of a lot of anchors that people had confidence in: religion, nationality, work, family structure. We could name
even
more.
gender, even gender.
Oh, even gender. So, and that loss of meaning for some people is resolved by an acceptance of uncertainty. So you get to this place where you go, oh, life is uncertain. I'm not sure what's going to happen next. There aren't that many rigid lanes that I need to travel in, although I need to stay within the lane of kind of not hurting other people. And I think that some people, when they do all the thought work, that you have to do a lot of thought work to get to this place where you kind of sign, you go, okay, I'm here, and it's all right. That works for some people. It doesn't seem to work for everyone, or it doesn't work for everyone at the same pace. I'm not familiar with Andrew Tate. I am familiar with Jordan Peterson. And he certainly has stepped in and provided, he's providing new meaning structures for the people that have lost the meaning and cannot settle into the uncertainty space comfortably. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
It
I'll stop
does.
there.
It does. And like, I think, he's one of those folks who I'll be like, half of what he says is fine and there's like nothing wrong with it. Cause it's like, make your bed. like go to the gym every day, create routine, leave your house, make friends, like
Have principles that you
yeah,
actually are
take a
consistent
shower
about.
every day.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
like there's like a sort of like discipline element to it. And then he'll be like, oh, and by the way, it's all women's fault for your
Mhm.
problems. And that's where it sort of starts to go awry. And he'll say stuff like, you'd rather have me talking to these men than have them just be in chaos, because when they get into chaos, they do way worse things. And like, at least with me, they're, like being productive members of society, which like I sort of generally reject the idea that like we either need to like have people who have a little bit of discipline and can interact in society, but like hate are part of the He-Man Woman Haters Club, eh, or be in total chaos. I reject that as a binary. That's not really how it has to be. I do think like whatever, I don't think anyone really knows what masculinity is gonna like become. And my sort of like feeling about it is people should be able to live who they like as they are on the inside externally without fear or shame.
Yeah.
I feel like that's sort of like hopefully what we can construct next. I think the problem that folks have with that is like that takes a lot of internal work, and sort of like
Exactly.
traditional notions of masculinity are much easier. And actually I think like traditional masculinity, not in all ways, but as has been sort of like weaponized, like, more recently, is a destructive ideology. It like basically strips the individual of all of the things that make them unique and individual. And then once that has happened, they start to act externally to try to make sure other people are doing the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a cult or a abuse system, that cycle that perpetuates itself. The I mean, I think one way to characterize the part that you talked about with Jordan Peterson, where he goes, the part that's not okay, where he says, like, and by the way, it's all women's fault, and you should rather have me doing this. I think one way to think about it is he is buying into the same, by not doing the internal work that's required to not become a re-traumatizer in a system where there's abuse, a re-abuser or a perpetrator. There's internal work that needs to happen, right? And he has clearly not done that work, because if you do that work, then you don't see things as perpetrators and victims as much. There's binary. So there's that piece, but there's also, he buys into the story about men that is part of the problem, which is men are just, victims of their instincts, and you have to like rigidify them or they won't be able to function. And that story doesn't speak to all the beautiful things that men do, right? And I'm specifically talking about men, like not humans here, but like men. Men do these amazing things, like set up democracy, right? I mean, I'm not saying women didn't help, but I'm saying like figure out that it's a good idea for people to try to be kind and just. Set up a system of laws. I mean, we complain about men because it's like, everything's a bottleneck through these people, right? But at the same time, these people are those that invented these, like a symphony. I mean, it's just so so it's too cartoony to say, essentially, right? Men are a bunch of animals, and you better put them together. And that, but it does speak to that. There is some truth there, right? There is some truth to the way hormones work, the way men's bodies work. There is more of a, I mean, there's data showing that there's more of a closeness to the instinct there around sex and around fighting, right? So that's real. So, okay, but we can work with that. Like, that's a reality, but that isn't, it doesn't have to be, therefore we have to oppress people, right? And oppress ourselves.
Yeah, I think the place that I always come back to on it is like, it's not my job to judge how somebody's masculinity manifests like one way or another. If people want to live their life in a particular way, like great, as long as you're not doing harm and you're not in coercive relationships with folks, then do your thing, you know? Um the problems that we get are when folks start to act out onto other people, and that's like all too common. I remember I was like looking, like for some research I was doing, I was looking through like the FBI database on like crimes, and they do like a gender breakout, and like 96% of all sex crimes are committed by men, 88% of all homicides are committed by men, 79% of all violent crimes are committed by men, and then also 75% of all deaths of despair are like attributable to men. And so, like it's a if I think if we figure this, if we figure this out, and I wasn't even looking for the domestic violence numbers, but like, I'm sure we all know where those are. I think like we live in a very different society if we can start to figure this out. And, that doesn't, I think the thing what a lot of people hear is like, oh, you just like want men to act like women. And like what I would really want is for men to act the way they want to act without people like telling them how they should. Like,
Yes.
and I think, you know, for like a shorthand, right? Like I think the patriarchy hurts us all, and it also lives inside of all of us, like regardless of gender or like age or race or socioeconomic status. So like I also think that like in order to do this work, everyone's gonna have to unlearn
Yes,
things. And like,
including women.
yeah, I think
Everybody.
we're going to, because the thing that I often think about is like, okay, so like a bunch of men like start to do some healing and resilience building work, and like then suddenly start getting rejected by the women in their lives, because like they weren't ready for it. And the thing about systems and like the way things are is that like change is scary. Even if
Yeah.
the change seems like it's going to be for the better, like, people have spent their lives adjusting to the world that we live in. Like that is like inherently unjust in a lot of ways, and um like is misogynistic in many, many ways. And so like for a lot of people, a new world where where some of those things are less of a problem. I don't think you can get rid of, like all social injustice. But like um
So what does that look like? Like, let's
that's
paint
a
a,
scary world for like a lot of people, because like you spend like 30, 40, 50, 60 years like living in the one that we're in.
yeah. But like, can we paint that picture? Like, you're making a mental leap that I agree with, and I bet Carmen agrees with. But what we're not spelling out is the link between, okay, so let's imagine the patriarchy ends. Wait, I mean, like, let's imagine we can nurse ourselves through the gradual change that will occur, right? Which I think we can using hope and and our own capacity for resilience and good psychology, right? Let's say we can nurse ourselves through that. Why would show, like, give an example of how maybe, if you could, if you're willing, how ending patriarchy or at least lightening up on it, allowing men to be more of who they are on an individual basis could make, how does that make society feel better to everybody?
I mean, I think at its core, like when you turn on the television, when you turn on TV, or when you go and like look on the internet, and this isn't just the case in the United States, like you see angry men doing angry men things. And,
Mhm.
like I just imagine a world where like people are less angry, where people are more joyful, where like people feel happier and better about themselves. like, I think it doesn't just impact men, it impacts everyone around them. You know, like I think a part of the reason I think about this a lot is like I had a like very close friend like growing up who went down like a very like dark path that like ended in like domestic abuse and jail, and he ended up taking his own life. And like it wasn't just his life that like that was like hurt or like torn apart by all this stuff. It was like the lives of the people around him as well. Um, and so like, you know, I think fundamentally we're not like this doesn't solve all of society's problems. There will still be, you know, there will always be some sort of crime as long as honestly, as long as there's like structural inequality, we'll get crime and that kind of stuff. But like,
Well, as long as there's mental illness too. I mean,
yeah,
So, yeah, I have 3 thoughts. I'm not sure if I'm going to remember all 3, but have you read the Unabomber Manifesto at
I have
all or recently?
I
I
have
recommend, you know who the Unabomber is, right?
Ted
And
Kaczynski. How could I ever forget?
yeah, and he wrote, I don't know, 30,000 word manifesto that led to him being caught. And his manifesto was all about how modern life, this is my shorthand version of it, how modern life, particularly technology, because those are the people he tried to kill and did occasionally kill, technology people, that modern life and technology was taking away the meaning of life for men. That's how I react to that. So I think you should read it, just to, because he had some interesting arguments, and oftentimes in the last 15 years or so, I've had the thought enter my mind that the Unabomber was right. He wasn't right in a purely objective sense, but he was correctly diagnosing
Yeah,
a
his solution maybe
his
was,
solution
but
wasn't right, but he was correctly diagnosing a problem. So that's the one point I wanted to make. A second point, there are a lot of people, YouTubers right now, who are unpacking Christianity, and kind of pointing out that Christianity is in many ways a social construct. And some of the people who are doing this unpacking are believers, call themselves Christians. So I don't want to say that it's like an atheism thing, but basically what they're saying is that humans went through this kind of mass delusion for the last 2,000 years, believing that the Bible, the scriptures, which are almost exclusively about patriarchy, believing that that was the inspired word of God and therefore how we all should lead our lives. And Jordan Peterson, in particular, is very heavy on that logic. And so there's a woman who's got a YouTube channel that I really enjoy. I think it's called Escaping the Patriarchy. But she's been doing some fantastic interviews about sort of unpacking how scripture actually began. And one short example,
isn't she a minister?
no, the one short example, she's just a
Person.
fascinating, interesting private citizen. She talks about a mosaic in a church in Rome that had the apostle, this is not the right name, but I'll just use it, the apostle Theodora. And a scholar wrote a book about the role of women in the early Christian church, and she used that mosaic as the cover for her book because it showed a woman who was a senior person in the early Christian church. 20 years later, that mosaic has been removed from the church because the Catholic Church could not tolerate this thing that is an affront against what it believes, which is this patriarchal approach. It's basically the idea is that the meaning of life runs through men. You know, that men are the channel for the meaning of life. I have now forgotten the third thing I was going to say, and that's fine. But I just want to say those two things. Oh, and back to this role of this connection between religion, the patriarchy, and the unhealthy place that men have ended up is profound.
Yeah, and I think when you tell a group of, I mean, I think there's a lot of things going on that are sort of like at play simultaneously. So like
Yes.
I think earlier I for one of y'all were talking about how like institution, you know, like the institutions that people believe in like are starting to like crumble or people are just like stopping believing in them. I think it's not it's even bigger than institutions. It's like the American mythology that we tell
Mhm.
ourselves is starting to crumble with the institutions. And so, you know, like something that I was absolutely told growing up that I heard, it was reinforced by culture, it was reinforced by like everyone, is that like men have like two primary like reasons for existing, which is to provide and to protect. Like the economics of our society don't allow for that in the same way that they used to. You know, like if you're working class, like the likelihood you're going to be able to be a sole provider for your family is extremely low. If you're upper middle class, like the idea that you're going to be needed as a provider is also like really low, to be honest. Like women are going, you know, we were talked earlier, women are outpacing men in college, getting degrees. Um, and so like when those things start to fall apart and you've been told a thing your entire life, you get out into the world and realize it's not true. It creates like a deep well of cynicism. And I think that the biggest problem that we face in America, like, is actually cynicism, more than basically anything else, because I think cynicism is a lubricant for radicalization.
And for
And
despair.
mhm,
And the other word I would add there is humiliation.
Mhm.
mm,
I don't know
Mhm.
how
mm,
you think about that, but I think that people that become radicalized often have had an experience of humiliation that, I mean, it just gets written into their DNA. They cannot overcome it.
yeah, that's really deep. I hadn't thought about that as much, but like that like aligns with like basically every conversation I've had
Yes.
about a lot of this work.
So why aren't we, so what gets in the way of us teaching? I don't mean us, like the three of us, God forbid, but someone who's more qualified teaching uh kids. I mean, so notice that the role of women has changed so much that we don't and we so undervalue the work that women have done raising children and taking care of homes, etc. That when women went into the workplace and started outpacing men, um, that has not been replaced. Like we so undervalue it, we don't acknowledge it, and then we don't allow schools to teach things like how to get along better, basic psychology, basic human interaction, how to know when you're feeling sad and when to reach out. These are things that traditionally mothers would teach their kids at home because they would observe them and see them in this relationship. So what keeps us, I mean, is it just that we're slow to change, that we don't figure out that this is missing and this is causing a lot of problems? Is it because we want to persist in the patriarchy or in misogyny where we don't want to value, we don't want to say that women have done really important work that we haven't acknowledged? Um, because it feels to me this is a systemic problem. All genders both suffer and all genders perpetrate this thing by not acknowledging human beings need to be trained on how to be in the world. And we stopped doing that. We even stopped Sesame Street. We even stopped Mr. Rogers. Like we even stopped the TV version of the mom, right? And so we do how does it work that we don't just see that someone needs to do that? And if it's a missing piece, someone maybe you don't like very much is going to do that. Um, I'm just curious why we don't see that.
I think there's two things happening. One, I think, is a hopeful thing, and like a lot of my friends have recently started having their first and second kids now. And one thing that I've heard really consistently among folks who are older and them is that this seems to be the first generation of men that have sort of writ large started to take on like significant childcare responsibilities. It's not equal right now, but like I've heard this like very consistently from like a lot of different folks that like we don't really know what to do with it yet because it's actually such a new phenomenon. And like, like I can say that was, true of my parents growing up. It was mostly my mom. And so I don't think we totally know what to make of it yet because I think it's like still really new. I think the second piece is, like economically, we don't value women's work. Like anything that's sort of labeled women's work doesn't get valued in the economy. Like nurses don't get paid what they should get paid. Um,
Well, they are starting to now that more men are coming into the profession.
and they and not all, but like many, I think also like we've seen like a rise again in sort of organized labor, and I think also like re the very recent sort of resurgence in organized labor also has like helped like in not in every place because not all nurses are unionized, but I think like that stuff has also been some of that has also been helping. Like teaching is like another good example. Like basically all care economy work,
Yeah.
like and
Elder care.
yeah, I think it's not like childcare is extremely expensive, but like childcare workers do not get paid very much.
Right.
Um, and that, like I think you see that even like in legislation, like in the Inflation Reduction Act that got passed, the thing that like a thing I'll never forget is that like in the negotiations, um, the like basically like universal child care was traded for battery tax credits, which like look, I like are
Right.
battery tax credits good? Sure, they are like they're good. Like like I'm not gonna sit here and argue that they're like they're bad. Like if we're gonna move away from fossil fuels, we need better energy storage. Those, that is important, but and also like I think this also gets to sort of the cynicism like piece that I was talking about earlier. The people often talk about sort of like people's cynicism around like politics, but it's actually cynicism around government because
Yes.
when people don't see government delivering for them, it
Yeah.
like reinforces the spiral that people already have, which is like, well, government doesn't deliver, so like we're not going to invest in government. We're not going to try to like we're not going to try to use government to make things better. And then we just end up in where we end up in a downward spiral and like it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Even if government was delivering at one point, like it stops at some point. Um, and I think we need more tangible examples of the ways in which government delivers in people's lives. Not even for like, look, like I clearly like I am a political person and have been for most of my career. Um, so like even if we're looking outside the sort of like lens of partisan politics, like when government like people actually do need to have faith in government, like um like it's just like that is a thing we need. Like if people don't, like it's actually quite bad.
Well, but
Uh,
let's explain that because there's plenty of people who think like, why government? But if you imagine trying to run a country, like try to have a functional country that interacts with other countries and does trade and manages international relationships without a government, what you're talking about is a plutocracy, right? You're talking about a government, essentially another government, but that's a government by corporations, which is what we would like to avoid.
And even like driver's licenses, you know, like there's just like roads, like
Yeah.
making sure that like there's enough that people have safe drink, you know, and like DC over the last like year, I think I've seen like 4 or 5 boil water notices, like where like I like in my neighborhood, like for like a day, like I couldn't even shower without boiling the water. Like I think really basic infrastructure needs like that. Like when people don't have faith that government can deliver those things, then like that is bad for a society. The and so like trading away like a battery tax credit or like trading away like paid family leave or that like people would have tangibly felt, even if it wasn't quite as popular as people would have liked it to be, it would have been a tangible thing that got delivered to them. And like then people could say like, yes, look, like we like government can deliver for you in tangible ways. And like that reduce that like that kind of stuff helps reduce cynicism.
Well,
Uh,
right, but you're trading off there who you're delivering for, right? So less cynicism among the battery people, more cynicism among parents, right? So who
which
has
is
the,
a bigger which is a much bigger constituency group and
in terms of numbers of people, but maybe not in terms of dollars.
yeah, I think there was a lot of behind the scenes advocacy on that, and I think you know, like most things in politics, the more organized the constituency group, the more likely they are to get the thing that they're looking for. And I think the folks advocating for the batteries were more organized at that time.
Parents were busy parenting.
Yeah, so um, we're almost at the 50-minute mark, so I
Oh,
wanted
we
to
haven't solved it yet. Let's get going.
wait, no, what? But I'm curious. So we have, I think, a real prospect for a woman becoming president. And my question is, how do you think about that in terms of whether it will help or aggravate what we've been talking about?
Mm.
You know, we were all pretty excited about Obama in 2008, but I don't think any of us fully anticipated all the consequences of that, because I think there were certainly groups of people insecure, cynical, humiliated, whatever adjective you want to use, who reacted to that by becoming more aggrieved. So I'm just curious what you think about
Backlash.
about this. I mean, I am hopeful. I'm always hopeful. I'm hopeful that if you do it enough times, something will get through. But I'm curious about your thoughts, Ross.
I think that the way the world has been is crumbling. And I think what we're really in a fight for is like, what are we going to create once it's finally all fallen apart? And I don't think we're that far away from it all sort of tumbling down. I think if if Vice President Harris gets elected, there will absolutely be a backlash to it. I think I think that's a foregone conclusion at this point. I think like we've seen this story play out enough times. I also the thing I remember moving to DC in 2009 after President Obama was elected was like, I don't think I've ever been in a place that was more hopeful and generative in that moment than, and that was a really special time. I don't think they'll be the same because like she isn't the same as Obama and the campaign she's running isn't the same and the energy is similar, but it is not the same kind of sort of energy. I think like people were like, oh, we're going to be in a post-racial
Right,
America.
right.
It turns out that like a lot of people had a lot of things to say about that. And I also think that like if you look at polling right now, she's actually doing better among like white working class voters than Biden was. And I think there's a reason for that. I think there's a large group. I think there's like a silent majority of like especially white men who are not MAGA. And I use MAGA as sort of like a right wing shorthand in this particular instance, but like they haven't been given an alternative and the left has not done anything to try to earn their votes. Like the only people talking to
Right.
them are the right.
That's right.
And so I do think we're in a moment right now where people feel hopeful that there might be space for them. And at our core, like humans are like human beings want the same things, even if our lived experience has those things manifest in different ways. Like everybody wants belonging. Everybody like wants to feel purpose. Everybody wants to feel a sense of obligation to something bigger than themselves. Like, and the right gives that to people, but they do it in ways that are really deeply harmful. And I think we have a moment, and whether we take advantage of it, I think is an open-ended question right now. But like, I think we're in a moment where we can expand where we can expand the tent. And again, it isn't totally, it's political, but it isn't totally political. Like there just needs to be space for people that aren't these other spaces. And like we need to invite people in and make them feel welcome and listen to them and respect them. And that type of organizing work isn't for everybody. Actually, like it really truly is not for everybody. Um, and the thing that I think is really important is that like if you're going to do organizing work, you have to deeply respect and I also think love the communities that you're
Right.
organized.
That's right.
Um, and so, you know, I think there's an opportunity right now for men to get out there and organize other men in ways that feel authentic. Sorry, there goes the puppy in the background.
Oh, that's okay.
We went almost the entire thing without her making noises, but Nacho, our other dog, I think went upstairs. And she's upset that Nacho left. So anyways, all that is to say, I think we have an opportunity in a moment where there's just a lot of energy. Vice President Harris represents the future. I think like Joe Biden very bravely like did what he said he was going to do, which is be a bridge to the future. Um, and I think that's why you've seen a lot of excitement on the left, but also like not even fully on the left. Like I would also say in the middle, like a lot of people have just been fired up, even if they don't love Vice President Harris, like they're like even if she isn't their favorite candidate, I think there is an excitement because we have an opportunity to move forward rather than going back. And I think the election felt like going backwards until very recently.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think like I think that's why if you know if I were gonna bet, I'd bet on her at this point because I think like when you present a clear contrast and it's like a future versus past like frame, people almost always end up choosing the future. Because people want to be hopeful. Like just because we haven't been in a long time doesn't mean we don't want to be.
That's right. In
That's
fact, people
right.
get exhaustion from cynicism and
That's
despair.
one of my favorite questions or comments. There's only one question that ever matters is, are you still hopeful? That's
That's
the only
right.
question that really matters for any of us.
I'm
Although,
hopeful.
say that again. I'm
I'm
sorry.
He's
hopeful.
hopeful.
Good.
And I think that white dudes for Harris made you, I mean, I'm curious, what were your 2 or 3 impressions about doing that. I know from following you that you were really so wonderfully surprised by the turnout and the enthusiasm, but is there anything else?
I think that I underestimated how much outside of sort of like the bubble we would be able to get. I was talking to a friend who like does organizing in like rural white communities, and he was like at a diner in Wisconsin, the night of the call, and there was like a table of people in this 12,000 person town, like at the diner talking about the call. And I think that I did not anticipate that we would get out. You know, like I thought we'd like raise a lot of money and get a lot of people on, and that would be very cool and useful. But it seems to have also sparked a conversation around masculinity that like honestly the like right-wing media has just like done like a lot of our job for us. Like the fact that they have spun up about it is actually makes it even more salient. Also, I'm very sorry. This is just this is what you get when you have a brand new puppy.
No, no, we're good.
It's not a problem. We just want to see him. Can we see him?
Pierogi, come
Speaking
here.
of hope, like there's nothing like a puppy to bring hope. I think one organizing idea is to have a puppy share.
Oh,
Oh, oh, oh, oh my
Oh,
goodness.
this is
Oh,
Pierogi.
oh, I love
Let me
you.
blur my background so it's easier to see her.
they're
Yeah.
like little bundles of love and whatever. Look at
She's gonna
that.
be huge.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
they're
look at
also
the
gonna be,
paws.
yeah,
Look at
big
the
bundle,
paws.
big bundle.
She's gonna be over 100 pounds probably when it's all said and done. But right now she's about 16 pounds and she goes to the bathroom everywhere in our house.
I don't think you have to. I wanted to say about the White Dudes Project, which I think is amazing. I don't think you have to apologize for it being any of this stuff for being political because it's like, you know what? It's really good for the country to have multiple options for people so that people don't feel like there's only one place that they belong. So, I mean, you could conceivably do the same thing on the Republican side. Like, I have a feeling that Trump isn't actually going to be the final candidate. And then maybe we'll have an actual choice between the future and the future. So I, I just think that just having no other choice is bad. Bad for hope.
Yep.
And I think like this is this is like what our politics has become is one party who is that is so deeply cynical like as to almost like be rooting for the destruction of the country, and another party that like just is so feckless and can't get out of its own way. Um, and it,
Reckless.
it's just it's true. Like
I know.
it just it's and you know like that doesn't feel like a choice to people. They like look at the options and they're like, okay, so like we're gonna have this dude who just like went up and like went on TV like 4 weeks ago and said like if you elect me, you won't have to worry about voting anymore. Or you like have the dude who like couldn't perform at a debate and like
There's
you
no
know
way he can understand technology.
yeah, and it's just like so what are people choosing between? And that's just like deep, or you've got like the guy, or you've got the brainworms guy.
Yeah,
And
right.
like so it's just like oh cool, like these are our three options. Like nobody wanted, like nobody wanted it. You pull like all the polling showed
That's
that
right.
people did not want those options, but those are the options they were getting. And so I think like some of what you're seeing is a release valve for people. They're just like so excited that we have an opportunity to have something different. Um,
Yeah. She's really the only one in the race who's new, you know. Yeah, right now.
All right. Well, it looks like you have to take care of pierogi there.
yeah, she was quiet for as long as I could have expected her to be quiet
Yeah.
for.
She was
But
amazing.
it was just great. I mean, I've always super enjoyed talking to you, Ross. You know that. And
Likewise.
And I think you're just doing such great, well, I'm not going to say such great, but you're doing such good things that should be ordinary,
Oh, interesting.
right? You're
Yes.
doing good, ordinary things, and more power to you. Adelante, as we say.
Oh,
I
Delante.
appreciate it. Thank you. And
Yeah.
it should be, some of this should be more normal, but here we
Yes.
are in the year of our Lord 2024.